All right, we're going to talk about the comparative anatomy and physiology of the circulatory system in animals. So this is the structure and function of the circulatory system. And since most of you watching are humans, we're going to start with a brief review of the human circulatory and lymphatic system, since we're most familiar with this system. And then at this point in biology or anatomy, perhaps you've dissected some animals in the laboratory section. Some of the most common animals are the crayfish, the earthworm, the perch, and the frog in dissection lab in biology. So I'm going to use these four animals to compare circulatory systems. So we can compare the structure or anatomy and function physiology in these five animals we're studying. So as a quick review, the circulatory system is a critical component of the human body. You have the pump, it's the heart, which pumps oxygenated blood into the arterial system, bringing oxygen to the cells of the body, at the tissue and organ level, really at the cellular level, but it also brings nutrients, amino acids, immune-fighting cells, and the lymphatic system is a part of the circulatory system. So there's a certain leakiness in the capillary level that the lymphatic picks up what the veins don't and pumps it back into the venous system. Now the veins bring the deoxygenated blood back to the heart. So the capillary system really is at the cellular level. So the arteries get smaller and smaller till they're at the level of the capillaries where oxygen exchange and nutrient exchange can happen at the cellular level. And this diagram just shows how there is a certain leakiness, and the lymphatic tissue is the leakiness of nutrients and cellular material that needs to be returned to the circulatory system. This will matter in a moment when we discuss open systems, where the hemolymphatic fluid is one conjoined system. Now, let's quickly review the human heart. So the human heart has a right side. It's a low-pressure system. The superior vena cava and inferior vena cava are the final two veins that dump blood into the receiving chamber, the right atrium, which goes to the right ventricle, which is the pumping chamber, which goes to the pulmonary artery. Don't get confused. An artery leaves the heart. And so this is deoxygenated blood going to the pulmonary capillaries, where oxygen exchange and carbon dioxide exchange happens. When this happens, oxygenated blood comes back through the pulmonary vein into the left atrium, into the left ventricle. This is a more muscular pump because it's a higher pressure system. This pumps blood to the entire body through the aorta and the other large vessels. Now, this is a simplified schematic. All right, so I've separated the right side on the anatomic right and the left side on the anatomic left, with oxygenated blood represented as red. And I've got the entire body represented as one big pool of capillaries, just to keep things simple. So the body and capillary exchange is happening here. The oxygen exchange is happening here in the lungs. So this is the human diagram. We'll come back to this after we compare the other four animals. So we've got two invertebrates, the crayfish, an arthropod, or a freshwater crustacean, the earthworm, an annelida, a worm, and let's turn to them first. One highlight is going to be an open versus a closed circulatory system in invertebrates. So the crayfish, the arthropod we're going to look at, has a very simple circulatory system. It's also an open circulatory system. So as the blood travels through the main arteries in a crayfish, the dorsal, ventral, and sternal arteries, this is an open system. So blood exits as hemolymph, and it goes into this large chamber called the hemocell. And it takes nutrients and oxygen to surrounding organs, and it returns to the heart in these sinuses that function as veins. They're not true veins. These sinuses take the blood back to the heart. It's a one-chambered pumping system. And the oxygen exchange mechanism is the gills. The gills are these feathery organs on either side of the cephalothorax of the crayfish, protected by the carapace. Now, an earthworm, the Annelida, has a different system. It is a closed circulatory system like ours, but it's a proto-heart. It's actually 5 lateral arches, sometimes called aortic arches, but really they're not aorta or heart. They're 5 lateral arches that are a pump. The oxygen exchange organ is the skin. The skin has to stay moist. The dorsal and ventral vesicles are very superficial, and the capillaries and interstitial fluid provide the oxygen and nutrient exchange before coming back to the heart. So at this early comparison, we've got the open circuit in the crayfish versus closed. We've got gills in the crayfish versus skin in the earthworm, and 5 lateral pumping arches versus a 1-chambered heart. Now, let's look at our vertebrates. We're high-level things. We're going to look at the single versus double circuit circulatory systems, and things are going to evolve and get more complex to more complex receiving and pumping chambers, as you'll see. Now, the perch is a fish. It's a single circulatory system, like the earthworm. It's a single system. It is a closed-loop system, but like the crayfish, gills provide the oxygen exchange. So the aortic system and the large arteries take blood to the capillary system where oxygen exchange and nutrient exchange happens. Now, the perch heart is a 2-chambered pump. So there's a receiving chamber, the atria, and a pumping chamber, the ventricle. Now, the frog is an amphibian. It is a double loop circulatory system. Now, in the frog, the lungs and to some extent the skin provides the oxygen exchange. So it's got 2 systems. So after the oxygen and nutrient exchange happens at the cellular level, at the level of the capillaries, the veins take the deoxygenated blood back to the right atria, which pours into the common ventricle. Now, the ventricle pumps mixed blood. I'm skipping ahead here, but the left atria, receiving oxygenated blood, this blood mixes into one single ventricle. When the ventricle pumps blood to the body, it splits. Some goes out the pulmonary artery into the lungs. Some goes into the aortic and large artery system, going to the body. When oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange happens in the lungs, the pulmonary vein takes oxygenated blood back to the left atrium. The ventricle mixes the blood. Now, reminder of the human system, it's a double loop. Lungs provide oxygen exchange, but there are 2 ventricles. So there's a left ventricle that pumps blood to the body through the aorta and other large arteries, and then there's a right ventricle that pumps blood to the lungs via the pulmonary artery. So in comparison, in summary, the crayfish is an example of a 1-circuit system with an open system. So hemolymphatic pours into the hemocell rather than a capillary system. The earthworm, the circuit is closed. It is 1 circuit, just like the perch has a 1-circuit closed system. But the frog had 2 circuits in a closed system, just like humans. Oxygen exchange, we saw examples of gills in the perch and the crayfish. We saw examples of skin in earthworm and frog. And we saw examples of lungs in humans and frogs for oxygen exchange. Now, the pump, we saw a wide variety of differences. There was a 1-chambered heart in the crayfish. There were 5 lateral arches, proto-hearts, or 5 lateral pumps in the earthworm. The perch had a 2-chambered heart with 1 atria receiving blood and 1 ventricle pumping blood. The frog, in its 2-circuit system, had 2 atria, but a ventricle that received mixed blood from the 2 atria. And the human, of course, had 2 separate systems, 2 atria and 2 ventricles, 1 for each side. I hope this has been helpful to you in your studies. Thank you.